Good morning, and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage. It's a quiet Sunday morning, and I've been swamped in Turbo 400s for weeks now. It's springtime, and everybody is in the mood, I guess, to have a transmission built. It was almost a year ago on a quiet, rainy day. I shot my most popular video. It's called Turbo 400 Tips. It's not that great a video, but I did apparently put out enough information that people like to watch it. In the back of my mind, I always thought I should do at least Turbo 400 Tips 2, that's today, to just cover a few more things, because there's always something to talk about with the Turbo 400. Let's start with finding a suitable core to rebuild. If you already have one, great. If you're always looking for more, like I am turning over every stone trying to find more. We don't have many old school junkyards in my area that you can still prowl around, and you might find one still attached in a vehicle, so you're probably shopping online, which fortunately nowadays it's never been easier to find a transmission while sitting in your chair or on your couch. And they probably shot a few pictures of it. Sometimes they're pretty grainy or, not visually clear, but if you're lucky, you can pick out a few things that might give you an idea what's inside. All Turbo 400s aren't made the same. They're all good. You can change all the parts inside to make it whatever it is you want it to be. But why not, if you can, spend your money wisely and get one with a few extra goodies inside? The number one most important visual clue when you walk up on a pile of transmissions is what is the vent made out of. If it's metal, it's a 65 to 74 case. It has 8 bolts for the pump opening. Regardless of how many bolts are actually in the pump, it may only have a 6-bolt pump, but it's an 8-bolt case. It has a 95% chance of having aluminum apply pistons and the round back direct drum that'll take the heavy duty 34 element sprag. It probably only has a 16 on it, but for less than $70 you can upgrade that, and it's an excellent starting point to build a transmission if you're lucky, like this one I'm showing the camera at right now. I bought this. The guy had just taken it out of his 72 Corvette, 64,000 miles. He changed it to a manual transmission. I got everything. Drive shaft, shifter, vacuum line, torque converter cover, nuts and bolts. It was extremely reasonable, and I can't wait to take this apart because I believe with the old style modulator and stuff and the low miles on the car that probably no one's been inside this one. And people have been asking for a street rebuild transmission. It's hard to find one that hasn't already been modified, so when I shoot that video, it's going to be on this 72 Corvette small block transmission. It had the original tag on it. After we put it in the trunk, it was right here. The guy asked if he could have the tag back, so we chipped it off and gave it to him. I have a picture of the tag, but for me, it wasn't that important. For him, he wanted a little bit of nostalgia to nail in his garage wall. The 8-bolt case was still made after 1974, but they're very hard to find in a Chevy bell housing, unless it's a 475 like this one, Visual Clues. It has a brake drum. It has studs on the tail housing, sometimes only 2 to hold that bracket on, sometimes they gave you all 6. Sometimes the parking brake and the roller bearing tail housing are gone, and they put a regular short output tail housing on it, which you can, because the output shaft in this transmission is correct once you do a little modification. But I see a few transmissions for sale, and I see the studs still sticking out of them. Most people didn't add those. So if you have those, regardless of the parking brake is there or not, you probably got straight cut planetaries. This is a 1977 transmission, but it should have an 8-bolt case. Every 475 I've stripped so far has been an 8-bolt case with a 6-bolt pump. The 65 to 74 metal vent transmissions, the case itself where it joins the engine is really thin. They're not inherently weak. However, after 1974, they went to the thick flange. Don't mistake this for cases that have HD cast into them. When you have the HD case, this does not. This had a bolt-on chin shield. The HD cases have 3 M10 1.5 bolts on each side holding an aluminum dust cover on. And in a four-wheel drive with a transfer case bolted to the back. There was also a metal strut rod that went down to the transfer case from the bell housing to support it. And the HD case was all about supporting the transfer case because they had some issues starting with the very heavy 203 transfer case. So shortly after that, the HD case was born. If you see the HD cast into the housing and everything I've told you, that does not mean the parts inside are anything but just normal, run-of-the-mill, the weaker sprag, steel pistons. It's going to be nothing special inside, but it is a nice case if you have one. But after 1975, this one's a 77. You'll see how thick the flange is. This is a 1986, also thick. Inside on the 1986 case, you'll see what I call the 7th hole. It has the boss for it, but it's not drill and tapped. And there's no chance over here of getting the 8th bolt that I named it. That's my numerology, if you will. It has the 6 all the time, 7, 8. 7 is possible a lot of times, 8 often impossible. Also note this void in the case. There's one lug missing right there. I was completely surprised when I stripped this 1977 transmission the other day. It had no visual clues that I would expect anything but a 6-bolt case. It's an 8-bolt case. You can see the extra aluminum, the 8th hole. The 7th was tapped even though it had a 6-bolt pump. And there's no void in the case with case lugs. Just like the 65 to 74. This is a 1977. It had a plastic vent. Has a thick flange. This is actually a really nice case. Has the best of both worlds. Up until this point, I've been showing you the Chevrolet cases that I have, but the Buick Olds Pontiac Cadillac version, this all still applies, and it's been my finding and opinion that after 1974, the Buick Olds Pontiac and Cadillac continued to use better internals. They were slower if they ever did switch over to the steel pistons. They typically kept all 8 bolts cast into the case around the pump. Rarely there's a 7, but most of them are 8. And they're a good source if you're going to cut the bell housing off anyway to install an aftermarket unit. In 1975, the big push was a metric system in this country. And the Turbo 400 gave in 3 areas. The external threads on the linkage, the small bolt that holds the Y bracket for the speedometer, and the mount bolts themselves are metric. Everything else remained SAE. But M10 1.5 on your mount bolts or 7/16 course are your only choices back here. If you look at your speedometer driven gear housing, in this case it's numbered 40 to 43, that references which driven gear this housing will accommodate. Here's another example with the numbers 36 through 39. That's the number of teeth on the driven gear. For every tooth you add or subtract from the driven gear, you change the speedometer about 2 miles an hour. It depends on your tire height and rear end axle ratio. For every tooth you add or subtract from the drive gear, you change it 10 miles an hour. So there's still a lot of gear combinations available if you want to make your speedometer dead nuts accurate. But I can tell you from experience, because I usually check every one to see what range the relationship between 1 revolution of the output shaft to 1 revolution of the driven gear. It's typically 2.5 to 3 turns of the output shaft is 1 revolution on the driven gear. So if you're in that range, I'm going to guess your speedometer is going to be close right out of the box. A lot of people ask about the slip yoke. This is one of my favorites. As long as you're not running super high horsepower, this is a cast yoke. If you're going to run, you pick the number 8, 9, 1,000 horsepower, go with a billet yoke. But this is a cast yoke, 1350 U-joint. Super strong, nice and short. And this one also has the counterbore. The counterbore is not important to me because I modify the output shaft to make it look like a real two-wheel drive car output shaft. This is a factory two-wheel drive non-threaded output shaft. No O-ring. And this recess right here is 3/4 of an inch. It's 3 3/4 from the splines to the end of the recess piece. This is a two-wheel drive bolt-on yoke, typical truck output shaft. And I've machined the same 3/4 of an inch. You can see where the O-ring was. It ends up same dimensions, 3 3/4 here to here. This is 3/4 of an inch. The end result, your typical short Turbo 400 yoke, 32 spline. Can go right on and off without being restricted by the O-ring and the O-ring boss. That's the part number once again. Technically 31 spline for a 32 spline output shaft. But I've been buying these online. They're about 35 bucks, 2-day shipping. Let's talk about the mount and the mount area for a minute. These are M10 1.5 bolts. A Turbo 400 has a wider pattern than a Turbo 350, Power Glide, etc. Most of your aftermarket poly mounts and even your aftermarket rubber mounts have an oval hole, so the same mount will fit either one. And they either have a single stud, or the good poly mounts just have 3 threaded holes. You can run one in the middle or the traditional 2 bolts. This section of the case, this bell housing has been removed for an altar bell. It's very strong. In many cases it's ribbed, or it's 2 or 3 times thicker than the bell housing flange itself. Whatever you have for a motor, that heavy cast iron thing is not going to break. Your case from here back's probably not going to break. Your failure area, if you don't run a mount, is going to be right here. It's only 140 thousandths thick through this area. It's hard to believe it even lasts with a mount. I can't ever imagine expecting this aluminum case to last if you don't run a transmission mount. So even if I run solid engine mounts, I'm going to run a poly transmission mount. Don't mount it to the frame. As soon as you start going over bumps and twisting the frame, you're going to break it right there. You can see why the aftermarket bell housing is so popular. It's thick and strong. It eliminates the need for a flex plate shield. You still need to cover the body of the transmission for safety, but this covers the bell housing area. I'll probably work 3 or 4 hours this afternoon building drums and pumps. I have 3 transmission fixtures with transmissions on them being assembled. I have 2 more to do on the floor. I'm hoping enough parts show up every day that the delivery trucks drive by without stopping. I stand in the doorway with a sad face because I'm waiting on parts. But if everything hits on time, I'll have them all done by the end of the week, and maybe I can do something else. I look at all my other projects. I haven't done anything but transmissions for 5 or 6 weeks now. That's just the way it goes. It's springtime. I hope you got something out of this video. I'd like to move on to a different subject, but this one is really popular, so I just keep trying to find different ways to present the information that might be fun and educational. So if that happened, like, share, subscribe, do whatever you got to do. I'll do what I got to do. You have a great week. Later, bye.